Hey, what's up, guys? Hello, Footballtalk here. Continuing our series of these divisional draft breakdowns. Like I already mentioned in my last video, we're going to be talking about every single team and every single player selected in the draft over this next month. And this is the first time we're switching conferences from the NFC to the AFC North. Then next week we're going to be talking about the East and so on. And I already said this as well, this is more of a podcast version where I really just get my thoughts out there. And the way we're going to be doing this is run through all the names first, then discuss them individually and how they fit within the new teams, and then talk about the class as a whole before, when I'm done with all four of them, when all four teams from that division, we're going to be ranking the classes against each other. So not really a big fan of those draft grades necessarily, but in division, I like looking at them, comparing them, how well did every team do. And let's just start here with the Baltimore Ravens. They had 2 first-round picks due to the Orlando Brown deal. And 27th overall, Rashad Bateman, wide receiver Minnesota. 31st overall, Jason Owe, or Odafe Owe, he's called now, edge rusher Penn State. I didn't want to mess the name up. In the 3rd round, 94th overall, Ben Cleveland, the interior offensive lineman out of Georgia. Another 3rd round pick late, 104th overall, Brandon Stevens, cornerback / safety, they want to call him, SMU. And then on day 3, 4th round, 131st overall, Tylan Wallace, wide receiver, Oklahoma State. And then 3 5th round picks, 160th overall, Shaun Wade, cornerback, Ohio State. 171st overall, Dylan Hayes, edge rusher, Notre Dame. And 184th overall, Ben Mason, fullback out of Michigan. So at the top of the board, Rashad Bateman, he was the perfect fit for me all along for the Ravens. I think it was middle of February where I did my favorite team to prospect fits, and Bateman was my guy for the Ravens. I just think he's going to be incredible with Lamar Jackson, exactly what he needed, after they already missed out on Kenny Galladay, and a guy like Allen Robinson didn't even hit the market. Bateman was the best guy in the draft in terms of after the top 3, he was my wide receiver 4. And I think he's exactly what Lamar needs. In terms of somebody you can put at the X receiver, let him win on slant routes and down the field. Operated a lot out of the slot as well in 2020, where he wasn't quite himself, but you go back to that 2019 season. So many passes over the deep middle, him catching the ball and running away from guys. So just going over the middle overall, being fearless in that department, what he can do after the catch, the fact that he can move him around, making the primary target, whatever passing play that you really want to run. You put him on the backside of RPOs as the slant option, or you put him in the slot with glance routes as well, all that kind of stuff. I just think he's going to be a perfect fit for that offense, and I thought it was excellent value. For him to drop to 27th overall, that was just perfect for the Ravens. And then 31st overall, they surprised me a little bit with Jason Owe, the edge rusher out of Penn State. Not necessarily what the Ravens usually do, because people are saying that he's such a Ravens pick. The Ravens actually do prefer edge rushers with some great production in college. If you look at Jalen Ferguson a couple of years ago out of Louisiana Tech, I think had the most sack ever in his college career. And then you think back to Terrell Suggs. He was coming out with the record for the most sacks in a single season for any college player. Just over the years, they like that production from that position. But with Owe, they go in the exact opposite way. Somebody who had 0 sacks last season. But you look at the athletic profile, fully transparent, I think they had him, right there with Gregory Rousseau as those fringe 2nd to 3rd round picks. And I think there's a lot of work to do in terms of his technique with his hands, just understanding the position, having a plan as a pass rusher, all those kind of things. But obviously freakish testing, running in the 4.3s, and just overall the explosiveness as a pass rusher. In the run game, really heavy hands, so that's definitely things to like, but there's a lot to work on as well. I think Baltimore can definitely get the right things out of him by giving him some time, but what's a little surprising here is they needed that instant impact defender on the edge since they lost Matt Judon and Yannick Ngakoue. They did resign Tyus Bowser, but they need that true threat off the edge in the pass game, and always not quite there yet, I believe. But definitely exciting, the skill set that he presents. And I think he absolutely has a shot to be the type of player that alpha pass rusher, has all the tools for it. Just at this point, so raw, just a long way to go. Then you go to Ben Cleveland though in the 3rd round, and that makes perfect sense. He's just a hulking guy, 350 pounds, I believe, at 6'5". Has more of that tackle build, but you look at him, just somebody who on gap schemes, which is primarily what they're going to run, moving guys off the line of scrimmage, being that big presence on combo blocks, who can push defensive tackles backwards into a lap of linebackers. You put him in the middle of that unit, and they needed some help there after losing some guys and just last year being not quite as good with that dive action up the middle. Lamar keeping it out to the edge, having to do a lot of the work. You make that work, that inside part of the option run game, as Lamar can just give the ball to J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards who get vertical. And that threat to the outside with Lamar gets more dangerous as well in that regard. So for Cleveland, I had him right around my top 100 prospects. The thing that I was concerned with a little bit here was some stiffness in the hips. That is definitely a factor. But you put him in primarily a gap run scheme and a lot of play action, not necessarily those deep dropbacks. Some of those issues, they disappear. So that made a lot of sense. And then 104-year-old Brandon Stevens, the SMU cornerback, actually primarily played boundary corner for SMU. And there's a lot of things to like in terms of the profile of a physical press corner. But the Ravens have already said that they want to try him a little more at safety. Not quite sure how it projects to that. Didn't see a lot of that on tape necessarily. But I like for a big guy, pretty good ability to change directions. Very competitive at the catch point. So there's definitely some things that you can build on. But I'm not going to lie here. End of the third round, I had him as more of a sixth rounder probably. So that was definitely surprising to me. But Eric DeCosta and company, they like those competitive guys in the middle rounds and don't mind going to the smaller colleges. Then in the fourth round though, Tylan Wallace, the wide receiver at Oklahoma State, another phenomenal value. I had him as a mid-day 2 wide receiver, and I like a lot of the things that he brings. Just don't look at first what his size is. Just tell me how tall you think he is. Because to me, when I first watched him as a freshman, I thought he was like 6'3", 6'4", just the way he played, the way he can elevate, beat guys on the sideline at the point of the catch. He's 5'11", which is kind of absurd to me. Plays like a big-bodied X-receiver, and that's kind of how I evaluated him. Smooth route runner, doesn't really take a lot of time at the top of the routes. Like if you haven't run curls and those comebacks, he's not going to be that guy who's just snapping those off and letting defenders fly by him. But in terms of just gliding down post routes along the sideline, like he brings a lot of that vertical outside presence. And you pair him up with Bateman, all of a sudden Baltimore has 2 legitimate outside threats and a lot of guys who can play on the inside. So I thought that was a great pick. And then 5th round, Shaun Wade, the corner out of Ohio State. In 2019, he was looked at as one of the top defensive backs coming back to college football. Was used on the outside in 2020 after the top 2 guys left. And he really had a horrendous season. Guys running by him not finding the ball in the air. Just a lot of issues that he saw there. So I'm definitely not going to project him to play on the outside. But you look at him as a nickel, especially with Tavon Young missing so much time these last couple of years. That ability, that feel in zone coverage, as a blitzer off the edge. A lot of those things I like. But you have to put him in the right situation. And Baltimore definitely does that with Wink Martindale, the defensive coordinator, wanting to bring a lot of pressure on passing downs anyway. Having Wade out there as a presence to rush off that nickel spot. That makes some sense here as well. And then we look at Dalen Hayes, the edge rusher out of Notre Dame. Good ability to time up the snap. Good with his hands, reading pass sets and countering the hands of the offensive tackle. Not necessarily anything that blows you away athletically or in terms of the length. So kind of the opposite of what they got in Jason Owe at the end of the first round. Somebody who can make an impact right away. I don't look at him as somebody who's going to be a dominant pass rusher. But you get him in the rotation there. I thought that was fine. And then 184th overall, the most Ravens pick in this draft, Ben Mason, the fullback out of Michigan. They already have Patrick Ricard, who also plays defense and special teams. So I think he's under contract for another year at least. You put Mason out there, I could see them running 2 fullbacks, like 32 or 23 personnel out there, and just mashing people in the run game. That's definitely going to be fun. Mason is one of those guys. They did use him as an H-back or as a wing almost as well, Michigan. But just wherever you want to put him, ask him to do those wraparound blocks, lead up in the hole, just that extra body in the run game. Another physical blocker, exactly what Baltimore needed, right? And you saw during the Senior Bowl week, strong pass protector, and a very natural catch of the ball as you leak him into the flats or just have him keep going after faking an ISO block. 3 fifth-round picks. Could they have traded down and gotten another pick in a very deep class? Sure. So not my favorite ever Ravens draft. I think they've had better ones in recent years where they really blew me away, and not really the right thing to do to almost not move around or manipulate the board. But overall, a very good class. And then they also got a Darius Washington as an undrafted free agent that I talked about in my last video, who I love. So that definitely works. And with that, we move on to the Cincinnati Bengals, who went 5th overall, Jamar Chase. Round 2, 46th overall, Jackson Carman, offensive tackle, Clemson. Round 3, 69th overall, Joseph Osai, edge rusher, Texas. Then 3 4th-round picks, 111th overall, Cameron Sample, edge rusher / interior defensive line, Tulane. 122nd overall, Tyler Shelvin, interior defensive line, LSU. And 139th overall, Deontay Smith, offensive tackle, East Carolina. 5th round, they picked Evan McPherson, the kicker out of Florida. 6th round, 2 more picks, 190th overall, Trey Hill, interior offensive lineman, Georgia. And 202nd overall, Chris Evans, running back, Michigan. And then finally in the 7th round, Wyatt Hubert, the edge rusher out of Kansas State. So top of the board, obviously Jamar Chase, my number 1 overall wide receiver. I thought the gap between him and Jalen Waddle wasn't as big as some people made it out to be, but still wide receiver 1 for me. You get that chemistry back with Joe Burrow as a guy who can play on the outside. You can move him in the slot, great acceleration off the line of scrimmage. Not necessarily the guy who will create a ton of separation, but is a good route runner, especially when you look at him as a 19-year-old. He was basically putting up the same numbers as Devontae Smith did in his Heisman Trophy campaign. And what really stands out about him down the field, when the ball is in the air, the alpha mentality. He's only 6 foot, but he plays like a 6'4", 6'5" guy as well. And then he has another gear after the catch where he's running away from people. He's right up there with the favorites for Offensive Rookie of the Year. They have a lot of talented receivers already in Cincinnati, but he's the number 1 guy now. And then Jackson Carman, 46th overall. That was definitely surprising to me. Coming out of Clemson, very talented player, but when you watch the tape, a little bit lazy at times almost, and just not the greatest athletic feet. He's a really big body, that thick build, who can move people in the run game, but when I look at it, what they really needed, the tackles that would have been there at the top of the round, after that whole class fell a little bit altogether, I thought there were better options on the offensive line overall. Didn't love that pick necessarily. They might look at him as a guard actually, inside, especially early on, but I thought that biggest weakness is at right tackle with Bobby Hart. But then in the 3rd round, Joseph Osai, edge rusher out of Texas. I think a guy that has a lot of desirable tools, not really a prototypical edge rusher. He transitioned from a stand-up role in 2019 to last season when he was playing on the edge exclusively. Not really textbook in terms of taking on blocks and holding his ground. He has learned to get better at that, but his ability to get around blockers, get involved in the backfield with his quickness, take the inside path if the offensive tackle widens too much on like outside zone plays. In the pass rush department, very much relies on his speed, and he has great speed, great testing as well on the pro day. A lot of that built off it, rather simple with his hand swipes at this point and kind of things like that. Has to be able to incorporate more counter moves and like really convert speed to power, which isn't really a big area of his game at this point. But like I said, a lot of qualities that he would like for the edge. And then those 3 4th-round picks I really liked. First with Cameron Sample out of Tulane, who transitioned actually to an outside linebacker. And I could see him playing more on the inside, especially on passing downs. Somebody who just wrecked people at the Senior Bowl. So much power, explosiveness, and quickness for his size. Can be a little reckless at times, especially if you put him out on the edge. Not always super consistent with his contain responsibilities. But just as somebody, like I looked at him, I could see him potentially playing just a free technique in the 4-man front and just shoot up the B gap. But especially on passing downs, I project him to play on the inside a lot. And then Tyler Shelvin, just one of the biggest humans I've ever seen. 350, 360 pounds. You put him there at the nose, there's not really anything happening up those A gaps. I wasn't as big a fan of him as some other people because I think he can get caught on the wrong side of blocks. Not really being able to work over the top of those and get involved on runs further to the outside. And in the pass rush department, I think he had only 6 pressures in 2019 and then sat out last year. So he's more of a 2-down player. But to get him there to back up DJ Reader, who I think is one of the most underrated players in all of football and missed large stretches of last season, just being able to rotate guys through and not really lose anything in terms of the run defense at least. I really like that. And then Deontay Smith, the offensive tackle out of East Carolina, one of my favorite tackle prospects in this draft. Another guy who really impressed me during Senior Bowl practices. You have to go back to the 2019 tape as well with him. Had some injuries there. But the length he has, the movement skills as a pass protector, some nastiness as well in the run game, being able to move guys wide in the edge. He's a guy that I really like as kind of a developmental prospect on the outside. 5th round, Evan McPherson. I'm not going to pretend that I'm really watching kickers. I know he was good for Florida, but that is definitely a little early for me. So I'm going to focus more on the 6th round, which I really like with Trey Hill, the center out of Georgia. I actually had him right there with Ben Cleveland, his teammate, who was playing right next to him on the Georgia line. Not the most athletic mover, but in terms of the zone run game, being able to push guys around, get that movement on like vertical run schemes, as well as the zone run game. There are some limitations with his movement, but very patient in pass pro, being able to pick up guys. He was excellent at picking up linebackers on those blitzes, which for a guy who maybe a little slow-footed, you want to say, that could be a problem, but he was just so patient, sitting down there and mirroring those guys coming up either gap. I could really see him start at one of those 3 interior spots. And then Michigan running back Chris Evans, he's a guy that kind of got lost in this pre-draft process, never put up big numbers for Michigan, but that may have been more due to their own ineptitude, not being able to utilize him the way that he should be, because he has some good contact balance as a runner. He was fighting through some injuries and all kind of things. But when he was out there, probably the most dynamic running back for Michigan that we've seen in the last few years. As a receiver, shows some really good skills in terms of a natural catcher, being able to set up guys on those angle routes and that kind of things. So to get him potentially taking on some of the role that you lost with Giovanni Bernard, I really like that, to get him there in the 200s. And then Wyatt Hubert, the Kansas State edge rusher, has put up some impressive pressure numbers and is very technically advanced, showing a plan as a pass rusher and really a non-stop motor, but only 31-inch arms and doesn't really have anything special to show for as an athlete, I believe. So more of a deep piece on the rotational passing downs. When I look now at the combination of Chase and Carmen, I don't like it as much as if they got Penei Sewell and like Terrace Marshall, the other LSU receiver, who went at the end of the 2nd round, even though I don't have his medical reports, of course. But I really like those 3 4th rounders, the 2 guys in the 6th. Kicker in the 5th is a little rich for me, but overall a pretty good class. And now let's move on to the Cleveland Browns. And what a class they put together once again. Let's run through these names real quick. Round 1, 26th overall, Greg Newsome 2nd, cornerback Northwestern. 52nd overall, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, linebacker Notre Dame. 3rd round, 91st overall, Anthony Schwartz, the wide receiver at Auburn. 2 4th rounders, 110th overall, James Hudson, offensive tackle Cincinnati. And 132nd overall, Tommy Togiai, the interior defensive lineman out of Ohio State. And then 2 picks in the 5th round, 153rd overall, Tony Fields II, linebacker of West Virginia. And 169th overall, Richard LeCounte, the safety out of Georgia. And then finally in the 6th round, 211th overall, Demetric Felton, the running back / wide receiver out of UCLA. Let's start with Newsome here. I think 26th overall, I just don't have the medical information to say something. He was my number 6 corner purely based on tape, so he was a little lower than most people. He kind of developed into the consensus CB4 in his class. I personally liked a couple of guys better than him, but to get him there, it makes a lot of sense to play a lot of zone coverage, where he really excelled at Northwestern, especially in cover 3. But when they put him in man coverage, you saw some of those skills. Not a ton of press technique necessarily, but when you put him on receivers and just let him go man to man, those natural matching skills, being able to stick with those guys across the field and down the field as well. There's a lot of things to like. Excellent athletic testing, one of the more athletic guys at the cornerback position in his entire class. Like I said, injuries the last 3 years. He's missed time in every single one, and significant time. So that is definitely an issue, and for a team that really has a lot of the pieces, being able to stay healthy is a big thing, but I'm fine with that value. A lot of people had him in that range. I think he was more of a top 50, around that type of thing, but 26th overall, I'm not going to hate on it, especially with who's coming up. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, the linebacker of Notre Dame, how the hell was he available at 52nd overall? There were some reports about some kind of heart issue that scared people off, but if that turns out to not be a big factor, he's gonna be one of the biggest steals from this entire draft. JOK played a lot of big nickel almost at Notre Dame, but then also moved inside depending on formation of the offense. He played more base personnel than almost any other defense in college football, and having JOK as that guy who can fill a lot of different roles, that is exactly why they were able to do it. Definitely not your typical Mike linebacker, 250-pound type of guy, which we don't really have many of those guys in the NFL anymore anyway, but he's around 215, 220, but he can do a lot of different things. He can legitimately cover slot receivers and tight ends. He can carry guys down the seams as a coverage defender in a Tampa 2 style of defense. If you put him at Mike actually on passing downs, he's a beast on any types of screen passes, just the speed that he gets to the ball with. But he's also really good in tight quarters, avoiding guys who are coming right at him, like pulling linemen, and they have a clear shot at him, but he somehow finds a way to sidestep them and gets his hands on the ball carrier. Explosive hitter. There's really so many things that you can love about him. I think he was my 17th overall prospect, so 52nd overall. Like I said, if he's fine medically, that is a major steal. And then 91st overall is the one that I actually don't love, Anthony Schwartz, the wide receiver at Auburn. And I get what they were looking for, because when you look at the wide receiver depth chart, they don't really have that dynamic presence in the slot, because Jarvis Landry, excellent receiver, really great possession guy, but not really somebody who can really fly by people and run circles around them with the ball in his hands. Schwartz has that true track speed, running a 10-2 in a 100-meter rally, and that speed makes him a dangerous vertical presence and yak threat. But at this point, to me, more of a track star who plays football than the other way around, lacking the nuances for the position, I would say. So to me, they were just better players with that similar skill set available later, even though I do understand what they wanted to accomplish by adding him, since they, like I said, they don't really have that element to the offense. But you look at guys like Kate Johnson from South Dakota State, who went undrafted, and some of the later guys that went, I think Schwartz was a bit of a reach, even though, like I said, I understand the principle of that type of player. I just don't love this player in particular. But then day 3, they absolutely rocked. James Hudson, offensive tackle, Cincinnati. He was my number 10 overall tackle. And there are absolutely things that he has to clean up. As a recently converted defensive lineman, his pass sets need plenty of work. You saw it during the Senior Bowl week. Those guys who were able to string together moves, really read his pass sets and take advantage of what he was doing in terms of the balance issues. His hand placement can be off target at times. But just watch the Georgia game, his last game ever. They played in the bowl game, and Azeez Ojulari, first half, nothing happening. Going up against Hudson, pretty much shut him out. I wouldn't say he dominated him or anything, but no pressures. Second half, he got 3 sacks, including the game-changing strip sack because of Hudson being out of the game. He has those skills. That drop-off was enormous, and that's kind of understandable. I think the other guy was a freshman. But I think Hudson, to me, that skill set that he presents, super athletic feet, great length, just the movement skills overall, comes off the ball with some energy in the run game. He was one of my favorite tackle prospects, understanding the things that he needs to still clean up, but knowing as well how high his ceiling could be. And then Tommy Togiai, kind of the opposite, maybe not the greatest upside in terms of being a superstar player at any point. He was never that type of guy for Ohio State. But you put on the tape, and that guy can ball. They put him at shade nose tackle at 6'2", right around 300 pounds, and he's taking on double teams. He's making his presence felt in the run game. He's not going to be moved off the spots, even though all those guys around him are bigger than him. The violence in his hands to take on single blocks, the ability to anchor against doubles. And then in the pass game, I think he's underrated because they moved him quite a bit to a free or a wide defensive tackle, get him that runway, and offensive guards, they have to kind of soft set him because they have to get to that spot in front of him, and he's just taking them and riding them back into the quarterback's lap. So not necessarily, I would say, the most versatile pass rush arsenal, not really the guy who's just going to be super quick and getting around guys. But he's good at reading pass sets, and when guys are oversetting to him, taking a different path, as well as those soft sets, like I said, just taking advantage of them and compressing the pocket up the middle. I really like what he brings to the table, and at the very worst, he's a great rotational piece for them. Then you get Tony Fields, a linebacker out of West Virginia, another guy who plays with a lot of energy. With those linebackers now, that was the biggest area that they needed to address. And I think with JOK putting in there and some of the other guys that he had already in the roster, Fields may not be starting, but he's going to be one of those guys that you love to watch in special teams. You're not really losing much. He can play multiple spots in the linebacker corps. And Cleveland wants to play 2 linebackers a lot, probably being nickel primarily anyway. So like I said, maybe not a starting role, but if you need to put him on the field, he can fill multiple roles, has pretty good speed, has the ability to be a threat as a blitzer, like what he presents. And then Richard LeCounte still in the 5th as well. He's an interesting one because people just completely wrote him off after he ran in the 4.8s at his pro day, which obviously you have a safety that can't run. That's going to be a problem. When you watch him on tape, that just doesn't represent what type of player he is. The way you see him shoot downhill, fill the alley in the run game, really just throw his body around without any regard for it, and just the energy he brings to the table as well. He was one of my favorite safeties to watch. I personally dropped him down a little bit as well after I saw those testing numbers. But what Cleveland did here, they looked at the GPS data and said, on tape, this guy's a 4.5 guy. So 4.5, I didn't look at him as like this great center fielder who can cover numbers to numbers, but he can play in the high post. You can rotate him down. They did a lot of different things at Georgia where the safeties were almost interchangeable. He's a really fun player, just such a physical presence, and made a lot of plays on the ball as well. So to me, LeCounte in the 5th, if he's fine medically as well, he had a motorcycle accident, which because of that, him running slower and some of the tapes late, not being as great as they were usually, that makes a lot of sense. And like I said, if he's back to his normal self, 5th round to get him there, that could definitely be a steal. And Demetric Felton, the 6th, in the 200s, that was very surprising to me because he's another guy who had a great Senior Bowl week, really impressive, transitioning to almost a full-time wide receiver role, putting him in the slot, running a lot of those jerk routes and pivots and all those kind of things. He was a guy who was very manipulative with his route running, looked very natural in that role already, and as a running back, maybe not the type of guy, definitely not like a workhorse type of back, not like they would need them in Cleveland with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, but somebody who gives you the versatility on some passing downs, because Kareem Hunt is great in that regard. Nick Chubb, definitely not the 3rd down back, but like I said with Felton, he gives you a piece. You can put him in the slot, you can put him out wide, you can put him in the backfield, let him run angle routes, be a guy who really creates some problems for the defense. I think to get him in the 200s, I expected him to potentially go in the 3rd round, at least in the middle rounds. So that was very surprising to me, and I just look at this whole class. Like, other than Anthony Schwartz, every single one of those picks were above value to me, with Newsome being the only one I can't fully speak on because of the medical stuff. And they acquired so much value while filling the biggest needs of the roster. So Andrew Berry has now had 2 phenomenal drafts in his first 2 years as Cleveland's GM. And I really think with the Browns, with the moves that they have made, they could be a serious contender here. And that brings us to the final team of this division in the Pittsburgh Steelers. They went round 1, one of the most currently mocked guys to them, Najee Harris, running back Alabama. Round 2, 55th overall, Pat Freiermuth, the tight end out of Penn State. Round 3, 87th overall, Kendrick Green, interior offensive lineman, Illinois. Round 4, 2 picks, 2 guys from Texas A&M actually. First, Dan Moore Jr., the offensive tackle, and then Buddy Johnson, the linebacker. 5th round, Isaiah Loudermilk, interior defensive lineman, Wisconsin. Round 6, 216th overall, Quincy Roche, the edge rusher out of Miami. And then 2 7th round picks, Trey Norwood, the cornerback / safety out of Oklahoma. And finally, 54th overall, Presley Harvin III, punter out of Georgia Tech. So 24th overall, Najee Harris. The whole thing, no running backs in the 1st round, running backs not having any value. I'm kind of torn between this thing because I would personally not take a running back in the 1st round unless he's like a immense talent. So 24th overall, I really thought they would go offensive tackle here, and there were a lot of good offensive linemen overall on the board. Not sure if I absolutely loved it, but Najee Harris, I'm not going to say anything bad about him. He's my running back 1. the most complete back in this draft, being able to run gap schemes and like hesitating and forcing linebackers to the wrong spots on zone runs, the power that he can build up and really be a bowling ball at the second level. You put him in pass pro, one of the most underrated pass protectors in this class. And then as a receiver, very natural hands, really good adjusting to the ball whilst it's in the air. And he wasn't just doing like dump off stuff and option routes. He was oftentimes the primary read on the mesh concepts as the wheel coming out of the backfield. Has some experience splitting out wide and moving around as well. So really, the all-around skill set, I think that is something that you can absolutely fall in love with. And I'm not going to hate on this pick. But yeah, there's going to be people who don't love running back in the first round. Second round, then Pat Frymouth to go with another low-value position, you want to call it, the tight end out of Penn State. I personally had a late first-round grade or fringe first-round grade on him. And he was my clear-cut number 2 tight end behind, obviously, Kyle Pitts. And I think he brings a lot of things that you can really like to the table in terms of somebody who can be a presence as an inline blocker and really move guys out of the way, bring some nasty to him, wanting to push guys out to the sideline. Partly why he got that baby Gronk name, which I'm not going to put him on that pedestal, but as a receiver as well, has that physicality after the catch. Certainly not in the same class as Kyle Pitts as a receiver in terms of being able to threaten vertically, but pretty good route runner, has a good feel for the position overall, big body who can box out defenders when the ball is in the air and win that way. But also, like I said, after the catch, he really becomes a locomotive, dishing out stiff arms and just lowering his shoulder into contact. He's a really fun and good player. 55th overall, I think that is perfectly fine value. I actually had him a little high on my board. And then third round, we go Kendrick Green, the interior offensive lineman out of Illinois. Another guy that makes a lot of sense to me. Played guard primarily, but also filled in a lot at center. And I actually like him best at the pivot, where he could be a direct replacement for Marquise Pouncey. But maybe they want to keep him at guard, which is also fine for him. He has a lot of experience with that. Maybe not your typical AFC North offensive lineman, where they're looking for a lot of those guys who are just mauling in the run game. And Green definitely wants to push people to the ground. But what really is his strength is being able to reach guys in the gap next to him in a place like gap, being able to get the ball carrier out to the edges, and like a wide zone run based approach. And then really athletic feet in the pass game as well, being able to stay in front of guys. So he's definitely a player I liked. I think the value is perfectly fine here. But then fourth round, those two guys out of Texas A&M just don't really inspire me. Dan Moore Jr., solid player. A little early for my taste. More of a positional run blocker, not really driving guys off the ball on those down blocks or anything like that, which really doesn't fit great with making a running back first round pick and needing to improve from dead last in rushing yards last season. What I do like is his ability to mirror inside counters, his understanding for angles, and the control he plays under overall. They definitely needed help on the edges after losing both their starting tackles, even though Moore may not be the most exciting one for me, because he doesn't have really athletic feet or strong anchor necessarily in the pass game. So kind of an okay pick. I liked a few guys better in that spot, and I really think that is a little early for him. And so is Buddy Johnson, just a pretty big, pretty physical linebacker, not really doing anything outside the tackles. Don't really see him starting anytime soon. Maybe if they want to get rid of Vince Williams because they need some money, he could fill in next to Devin Bush as that guy who's primarily blitzing on passing downs, because I don't really see him covering anybody man-to-man and doesn't have the greatest range as a zone defender either. So probably a lot of special teams early on, and then they look what they have in him next year with Vince Williams, not totally sure about his contract situation. Then fifth round as well, Isaiah Loudermilk, the interior defensive lineman out of Wisconsin. The Steelers certainly have a type as that 4 or 5 technique, depending on the terminology that you use. The guy who lines up right across the offensive tackle or shaded to the inside like a 4-eye. A player who will definitely just keep on working, but not really dominant in any regard. And had a couple of knee injuries in college that may be concerning going forward. Probably more of a 7th to UDFA ranking for me. If they really just wanted to add some depth behind Cameron Hayward and Stephon Tuitt, I get that. But it did cost them a 4th rounder next year to acquire this pick as well. They actually traded up. Not an exciting necessarily, and they might have been able to get him in the 7th round where he had 2 picks, plus not give up a 4th rounder next year. like I said, not the most exciting pick for me. But what I do really like, 6th round Quincy Roche, the edge rusher out of Miami. He makes a lot of sense because, like I said, they have those two guys on the inside who can really push the pocket and force the quarterback to escape to the outside. Where Roche, you get somebody who is really good with his hands, has the presence as a speed rusher. You get him in on some passing downs, and he can just clean up sacks. He could be somebody who gets a lot of production in year one, just being there on the outside and just being able to get there before the quarterback can escape. Somebody who's really good at reading the pass sets and countering the hands of offensive tackles, as well as being able to take advantage of the inside path when tackles have to overset him because of that speed. So he has some things that he can counter off from as a rusher, but doesn't really offer much power in that regard. That's the only real issue that I have with him. But 216th overall, I really looked at him more as somebody who's going in the middle of this draft. Trey Norwood in the 7th, I don't love. Like, you'll look at him at the Senior Bowl, another guy who just got embarrassed a few times. A little bit of stiffness, not the greatest speed. As a coverage guy, I really don't think he's going to play any type of man coverage, which he probably doesn't have to in Pittsburgh, because they most likely look at him as a pure nickel, and they play a lot of zone, so that could make some sense. Has some good ball skills, does present a physical presence on the inside. But they also got Shakur Brown, the cornerback out of Michigan State, who I talked about in my UDFA breakdown. You can check that out later, who I actually like better as a nickel. And so I think Norwood, if he can contribute on special teams, yeah, they lost their starting nickel, Mike Hilton, and Cameron Sutton apparently wants out as well. So I get that, but just not a player that I really looked at as somebody that I wanted to acquire. And then Presley Harvin, the punter out of Georgia Tech. I know he has a big leg. I know he's like 260 pounds, so he doesn't have that typical punter build. To get him 5 picks before the draft wraps up, that's exactly where you would draft guys like this. Like, I like that a lot better than guys like the Bengals drafting a kicker in the 5th or 2 long snappers in the 6th. I'm not really going to speak on it. Like I said, I don't evaluate specialists. The class as a whole, love. Like, if you put it in context with positional value, Frymouth to me was the only one who was definitely above value to go with Quincy Roche in the 6th round. But you're talking about 4 picks in between those and a couple of guys who are just like meh to me. Nothing that really gets me out of my seat. And with that, let's just get to these rankings. Like I said, I'm just going to compare these draft classes to each other. I think the Browns put the best classes in this entire draft, being able to fill out the roster, address some of those needs that they had, while still acquiring value throughout this draft process. Then you have the Baltimore Ravens. They draft well every year. Actually, not their greatest year, not the type of things that I'm used to from them in terms of, like I said, manipulating the board, just getting those steals in the later rounds. But they did get a Darius Washington. I'm very excited about him. Check out my UDFA breakdown. He's going to be in there. Cincinnati Bengals. Like I said, some of the things that they did with Jackson Carman, getting him in the 2nd round. I would have personally probably gone Penei Sewell 5th overall, but I get the Chase pick. If Joe Burrow really wanted him, and you have a quarterback coming off a major injury, you want to give that guy the type of piece that he thinks he needs, even though you have to look at maybe getting that offensive tackle. I know they want to get the ball out quickly and all those kind of things, but to me, Sewell, like, you can argue either way, but then I think you get a better offensive tackle in the 2nd round, even though I like what they did trading back, getting those 2 4th-round picks and what they did with them coming over from New England. So they are definitely a team to look out for. And then the Steelers, to me, I just talked about them. Nothing super exciting to me. I'm a huge Najee Harris fan. The whole running back in the 1st round conversation, we can have that another day. But like I said, not the biggest value positions that they picked up. And their first 3 picks are probably starters on the offense where they needed a boost. But nothing, like I said, that blows me away overall of the class. I don't think it quite matches up to the other guys. I don't think it quite matches up with the other teams here. There's certainly a drop-off from the other 3. But the Steelers have done this in past years. They pick good football players. And if they work out, that's going to be fine. Even though you can argue all those kind of things with positional value, like I said. But let's just wrap this thing up here. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, share it with a couple of friends who you think would really enjoy these in-depth breakdowns. The NFC North video should pop up here any second. And like I said, we're going to be talking about every single division over these next 3 weeks from now. Please consider I recorded this about a week beforehand, so there may be some roster moves that I haven't considered yet that came up. But overall, those are my thoughts on the AFC North. Let me know what you think down in the comments, and do not hesitate to contact me on any of my social media platforms, which you can find linked down below in the description, as well as here on the screen right now. Next week, we're going to be talking about the NFC and AFC East. So until then, see you later. Peace.